These 5 CEOs were billionaires. Now, they're prison inmates. What happens when the most powerful people in the corporate world, individuals who control billions of dollars, realize their entire empire is built on a lie? They double down. Today, we are looking at 5 massive frauds that resulted in 5 prison sentences. We are going to expose the mastermind behind a $65 billion Ponzi scheme, a Silicon Valley darling who faked a $9 billion medical technology, and a crypto kingpin who stole $11 billion directly from his customers. We will also look at the pharma bro who raised the price of life-saving drugs by 5,000%, and the classic corporate criminal who bankrupted a $70 billion company in a matter of weeks, leaving 20,000 employees without jobs or pensions. By the end, you'll see the pattern. Let's look at how these 5 CEOs lost absolutely everything, trading their private jets and corner offices for a concrete cell block. We start with the most infamous corporate criminal of the modern era, the undisputed king of the Ponzi scheme, Bernie Madoff. For decades, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities was considered the gold standard of Wall Street. Madoff wasn't just some fringe outsider. He was the former chairman of the NASDAQ. He was financial royalty. To invest with Bernie Madoff was considered a privilege. You had to know somebody who knew somebody just to get him to take your money. He promised his clients steady, incredibly consistent returns of around 10 to 12% year after year, regardless of whether the stock market was booming or crashing. His clients included A-list celebrities, massive charities, European royalty, and thousands of retirees who entrusted him with their entire life savings. But there was a dark secret hidden inside the iconic Lipstick Building in Manhattan. Madoff's legitimate brokerage business was on the 19th floor, but down on the 17th floor, behind a locked door that only a select few employees could access, the real business was happening. There was no proprietary trading algorithm. There was no split strike conversion strategy as he claimed in his glossy marketing brochures. The 17th floor was running the largest Ponzi scheme in human history. Madoff was simply taking the money from new investors and using it to pay the fabricated profits of the old investors. For nearly 30 years, he didn't make a single actual trade. To keep up the illusion, his team used ancient dot matrix printers to generate millions of pages of fake account statements, manually typing in fake stock trades that had already happened in the past to make it look like they were financial geniuses. The scam worked perfectly until the 2008 financial crisis hit. As the global economy melted down, panicked investors suddenly wanted their money back. In the first week of December 2008, Madoff faced $7 billion in redemption requests. But the vault was empty. He only had a few $100 million left. On December 10, 2008, Madoff invited his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, who worked on the legitimate side of the business and allegedly had no idea about the fraud, to his Manhattan penthouse. He broke down. He looked at his sons and confessed that the entire wealth management division was an illusion. In his exact words, he told them it was one big lie, basically a giant Ponzi scheme. He admitted he was broke, insolvent, and that he fully expected to go to jail. Horrified by the biblical scale of their father's betrayal, his sons immediately contacted a lawyer, who contacted the FBI. The next morning, federal agents knocked on Madoff's door. The $65 billion empire had evaporated overnight. The fallout was catastrophic. Charities went bankrupt, retirees lost their homes, and the tragedy destroyed Madoff's own family. On the exact 2-year anniversary of his father's arrest, Madoff's eldest son, Mark, tragically took his own life. His other son, Andrew, died of cancer a few years later, maintaining to his last breath that the stress of his father's crimes had caused his illness. Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. The man who once lived in a $24 million penthouse spent the last 12 years of his life in a federal medical center in North Carolina, earning pennies an hour fixing broken telephones.
He died behind bars in 2021 at the age of 82. While Bernie Madoff stole money from the wealthy, our next CEO put millions of actual human lives in mortal danger. Elizabeth Holmes was the ultimate Silicon Valley darling. She was the founder and CEO of Theranos, a health technology company that promised to revolutionize medicine forever. Holmes claimed that she had invented a magical machine called the Edison. According to her pitch, the Edison could run hundreds of complex medical tests, detecting everything from high cholesterol to cancer to HIV, using just a single drop of blood taken from a painless finger prick. No more massive needles, no more vials of blood. It was a utopian vision, and investors threw money at her. At her peak, Elizabeth Holmes was the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. Theranos reached a staggering valuation of $9 billion. She put together a board of directors filled with political heavyweights, including former Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. Holmes meticulously crafted a persona designed to project absolute genius. She notoriously idolized Apple founder Steve Jobs. She wore a daily uniform of black turtlenecks to mimic him. She hired his old advertising agency. She even intentionally lowered the pitch of her voice, speaking in an unnervingly deep, forced baritone to command authority in male-dominated boardrooms. There was just one massive, fatal problem. The Edison machine did not work. It was a complete fabrication. Inside the sleek casing of the Theranos machines, the internal robotics constantly jammed, broke blood vials, and produced wildly inaccurate results. To hide the failure, Holmes and her executive partner and secret boyfriend, Sunny Balwani, orchestrated a massive cover-up. They bought heavy commercial blood testing machines from companies like Siemens, secretly altered them to handle smaller blood samples, and ran the patient tests on those commercial machines while telling the world they were using the revolutionary Edison technology. But the delusion of the blood samples meant the results were dangerous and wrong. Real patients were being told they had prostate cancer when they were perfectly healthy. Pregnant women were being given false information about their hormone levels. It was a ticking time bomb of medical malpractice. The walls finally closed in when Wall Street Journal investigative reporter John Carreyrou began digging into the company after receiving tips from brave medical whistleblowers. Despite Holmes unleashing armies of high-priced lawyers to intimidate the whistleblowers and the journalists, the truth finally broke. The Wall Street Journal published a devastating expose revealing that Theranos was running a fake technology. The $9 billion valuation plummeted to zero. The US government stepped in and the criminal charges rained down. During her 2021 trial, the facade completely shattered. The jury saw through the Steve Jobs cosplay and the deep voice. Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors. Today, the former Silicon Valley golden child is no longer wearing black turtlenecks. She is wearing a khaki prison uniform. She is currently serving an 11-year and 3-month sentence at a federal women's prison camp in Texas. She will not be eligible for release until at least 2032.
If Elizabeth Holmes was the fake genius of Silicon Valley, SBF was the fake savior of the crypto world. Known simply as SBF, he was the founder and CEO of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX. In a financial sector known for shady characters, SBF aggressively branded himself as the ethical, trustworthy adult in the room. With his intentionally messy, unkempt hair, cargo shorts, and oversized t-shirts, he looked like a harmless math nerd who just happened to be worth $26 billion. He constantly preached a philosophy called effective altruism, the idea that he was only accumulating massive wealth so he could give it all away to charity to save the world. He spent millions on Super Bowl commercials featuring Larry David. He bought the naming rights to the Miami Heat's NBA arena. He paid A-list celebrities like Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen to tell the public that FTX was the safest place to store their crypto. Behind the scenes, the reality was a billionaire frat house built on unprecedented corporate fraud. SBF moved the company's headquarters to the Bahamas, where he and a small circle of executives lived together in a massive $40 million penthouse at the exclusive Albany resort. The group, all in their 20s, reportedly engaged in polyamorous relationships and lived a life of absolute excess. While SBF claimed he drove a beat-up Toyota Corolla to project humility, his company was secretly chartering private jets to fly Amazon packages and catering from Miami to the Bahamas. But the real crime was the missing money. When a customer deposited cash or crypto into FTX, they believed it was sitting safely in a digital vault. In reality, SBF had installed a secret backdoor in the company's code. He was quietly draining billions of dollars of customer deposits and funneling them into his private hedge fund, Alameda Research, which was run by his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Caroline Ellison. SBF used his customers' life savings as his personal piggy bank. He used their money to make wildly risky venture capital investments, buy luxury real estate for his parents, and make massive political donations to buy influence in Washington. The entire house of cards collapsed in November 2022. A crypto news site, CoinDesk, published a leaked balance sheet showing that Alameda Research was secretly propped up by billions of dollars of a made-up crypto token invented by FTX. The revelation triggered a massive bank run. Terrified customers rushed to withdraw their funds. But the money wasn't there. Over $8 billion in customer funds had vanished into thin air. The $26 billion empire filed for bankruptcy in a matter of days. SBF's net worth dropped to zero faster than anyone in recorded financial history. When the federal indictments came down, his inner circle, including Caroline Ellison, immediately flipped on him and testified for the government. They revealed that SBF was the mastermind who directed them to steal the money. In November 2023, a federal jury found him guilty on all 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy. The judge did not buy the harmless math nerd act. Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The man who once ruled the crypto world from a $40 million tropical penthouse is now serving a quarter of a century behind bars, proving that no amount of celebrity endorsements can save you from federal wire fraud. Our 4th CEO didn't run a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme, but he did achieve something arguably much worse. He became the most hated man in America. Martin Shkreli was a brilliant but deeply arrogant hedge fund manager who decided to enter the pharmaceutical industry. He founded a company called Turing Pharmaceuticals, and his business model was as ruthless as it was legal. In 2015, Shkreli's company purchased the exclusive rights to a life-saving drug called Daraprim. This drug is an anti-parasitic medication heavily relied upon by patients with compromised immune systems, specifically pregnant women, cancer patients, and people living with HIV and AIDS. Before Shkreli bought the drug, it cost $13.50 per pill. The very next day after taking control of the manufacturing, Shkreli jacked the price up to $750 per pill. That is an overnight price increase of more than 5,000%. He didn't change the formula, he didn't improve the drug, he just bought a monopoly on a medicine that vulnerable people needed to survive and held them hostage. The public backlash was apocalyptic. But instead of apologizing, Shkreli leaned into the villain persona. He trolled people on Twitter, he bragged about his immense wealth. In the ultimate display of absolute arrogance, he spent $2 million at auction to buy the sole existing copy of a secret Wu-Tang Clan album, just so no one else could listen to it. He would live stream himself in his apartment, drinking wine and mocking the journalists who criticized him. When the United States Congress subpoenaed him to testify about the devastating impact of his price gouging on the American healthcare system, his behavior was astonishing. Sitting in the halls of Congress, while Representative Elijah Cummings begged him to look into his conscience and see that people were dying, Shkreli visibly rolled his eyes and smirked. He repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, refusing to answer a single question. Minutes after walking out of the hearing room, he jumped on Twitter and called the members of Congress imbeciles. But karma has a funny way of catching up to you. Martin Shkreli was not arrested for raising the price of Daraprim because, terrifyingly, price gouging a monopoly drug is actually legal in the United States. Instead, the intense media spotlight he brought upon himself caused federal investigators to look into his past. The FBI discovered that before his pharmaceutical venture, Shkreli had run his hedge funds like a miniature Bernie Madoff. He had lost millions of dollars of his investors' money through terrible trades, lied to them about it, and then illegally looted assets from a different pharmaceutical company he controlled to pay them back. The pharma bro was convicted of securities fraud. His smirking finally stopped when a federal judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison. The government also seized his prized $2 million Wu-Tang Clan album to pay his massive fines. Although he was released from prison in 2022, he has been slapped with a lifetime ban from ever participating in the pharmaceutical industry again.
Finally, we arrive at the godfather of modern corporate corruption. Before there was FTX, before there was Theranos, there was Enron. And at the center of the Enron collapse was its hyper-aggressive, relentlessly arrogant CEO, Jeffrey Skilling. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Enron was not just an energy company, it was the darling of Wall Street. Fortune magazine named them America's most innovative company for 6 consecutive years. They claimed revenues of over $100 billion. Jeffrey Skilling built a corporate culture that worshipped raw intelligence and extreme ruthlessness. They called themselves the smartest guys in the room. Skilling instituted a brutal internal review system known as rank and yank, where every year the bottom 15% of employees were fired, creating an atmosphere of sheer terror and ultra-competitiveness. But Enron's massive profits were a complete hallucination. Skilling championed a controversial accounting loophole called mark-to-market accounting. This allowed Enron to sign a 20-year contract to deliver energy, estimate exactly how much profit they thought they would make over the next 2 decades, and write that entire massive imaginary number on their balance sheet on day one. When the actual deals lost money, they couldn't publicly admit it without crashing their stock price. To hide the massive bleeding losses, Skilling and his chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, created an incredibly complex web of fake shell companies. Because they thought they were invincible, they literally named these fake offshore companies after Star Wars characters like Jedi and Chugo. They would take their toxic, debt-ridden assets and sell them to these fake shell companies, completely erasing the debt from Enron's official public records. The corporate greed reached a horrifying peak during the California energy crisis in the year 2000. Enron energy traders, encouraged by the ruthless corporate culture, discovered they could create artificial power shortages to drive up the price of electricity. They literally ordered power plants to shut down on the hottest days of the year, causing massive rolling blackouts across the state of California, just so Enron could charge the state astronomical rates for emergency power. But you cannot hide billions of dollars in debt forever. In the fall of 2001, the financial engineering finally unraveled. Investigative reporters and skeptical financial analysts started asking questions that Skilling couldn't answer. When the truth about the shell companies and the hidden debt broke, the company went into freefall. In a matter of weeks, Enron went from a $70 billion valuation to total bankruptcy. The collapse was apocalyptic. 20,000 employees lost their jobs and their entire life savings because they had been forced to invest their retirement accounts in Enron stock. Meanwhile, executives like Skilling had quietly sold off millions of dollars of their own shares right before the crash. The Enron scandal was so massive that it literally destroyed Arthur Andersen, one of the top 5 accounting firms in the entire world, for their role in covering up the fraud. Jeffrey Skilling maintained his absolute arrogance until the very end, claiming he had done nothing wrong and blaming the collapse on a run on the bank. A federal jury disagreed. He was convicted of multiple federal felony charges, including insider trading, securities fraud, and making false statements. Skilling was originally sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. He served 12 hard years behind bars before his sentence was reduced, and he was finally released in 2019. Bernie Madoff, Elizabeth Holmes, Sam Bankman-Fried, Martin Shkreli, Jeffrey Skilling. 5 billionaires who had the world at their fingertips. 5 brilliant minds who could have achieved massive, legitimate success if they had simply operated within the bounds of reality. But when you look closely at these 5 stories, a terrifying pattern emerges. It isn't just about the money. It is about a psychological disease that infects the highest levels of corporate power, the God complex. Every single one of these CEOs reached a point where they genuinely believed that the rules of physics, the laws of economics, and the criminal justice system simply did not apply to them. Madoff believed he could cheat math forever. Holmes believed she could fake biology. Bankman-Fried believed he could buy his way out of a bank run. Shkreli believed his intellect made him immune to consequence. And Skilling believed he could literally hide billions of dollars in the shadows. They surrounded themselves with enablers. They fired anyone who brought them bad news, and they became so insulated by their own wealth and their own hype that they forgot a fundamental truth. A house built on lies will eventually meet a storm it cannot withstand. And when that storm comes, it doesn't matter how many politicians you've paid off, how many Super Bowl commercials you've run, or how many magazine covers you've graced. The federal government does not care about your valuation. From the boardroom to the cell block, these 5 CEOs prove that unchecked arrogance is the most expensive commodity on earth. If you want to dive deeper into exactly how these massive corporate empires fell apart, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We break down the biggest financial scandals and corporate thrillers in history every single week. Until next time, keep your eyes open and don't believe everything you see on a balance sheet.